Well, like here in Arizona, the way they get around it is if the majority of your sales comes from tobacco, and you have a good air filtration system, you're allowed to smoke in the building, as well as long as you're detached from any other building. So, like, a lot of bars can't do it at. There are some bars who got their tobacco license specifically so they could allow smoking again.
On the topic of missing things entirely, this is Audio Tapes and Visual Drugs. How are we doing today?
Doing pretty good.
We have our first guest on here, Enigmancer.
Hello.
How does it feel to be on a show?
Nerve-wracking and exciting.
Well, really, it should be neither of those things because it's neither nerve-wracking nor exciting. My name's Blind, and this is a show where we talk about media and film and alcohol and other things that we nerd out about. I'm leaving for PAX East in a few days, so hopefully I actually get this edited by by the time I have to leave. Let's just jump right into it. Who's drinking tonight?
Just a 90-minute IPA from Dogfish Head. It's a pretty standard IPA. Nothing super special about it.
I will just jump into what I'm having. So I'm having a beer that I actually planned on having on the show 2 weeks ago. I bought a 4-pack and I had one. And then I got sick. And then I didn't drink. So I am finally drinking my second one. This is Phantom Brewing's Resolution Solution. It's 11% extra strong Imperial Stout.
It looks like molasses.
That's what you call sipping beer.
I am also drinking a rather dark beer. It's a local brewery called Daggerad. They're out in Burnaby. It is a coconut and pandan infused 8.5% stout.
Nice. That sounds way better than what I'm drinking. Mine's just thick, but it's good thick. I brought you onto this show for a number of reasons, but Enigmancer, how about you do like a little bit of an introduction? Who are you, and what the hell are you doing here?
Who am I, like, as a whole? How did we meet? Where do I start?
Yeah, wherever you'd like. Where it feels
Okay,
right.
well, I mean, I met Blind on the bus going to PAX last year. We had like 4 hours to kill, so why not talk to someone?
It's really nice when you land on a bus next to someone who's willing to talk to you and not like in the, oh God, this person's talking to me, so I'm going to talk back to this person. It's two people that happen to want to talk to the person next to each other.
Yeah. I hadn't started streaming at that point, but I was thinking about it. And since then, I have started very recently. Don't really know how to classify myself in all of that yet, but outside of streaming, I do photography, fitness things, I guess. Yeah, it's not too exciting.
So on this episode, we're going to be kind of covering the normal stuff, but we're also going to be doing some conspiracy theory-ish things towards the end. And I guess one of the reasons why I decided to have you on this show, actually, and the way that I pitched it to Ryan was This guy wears tinfoil hats while he's streaming, and Rhinestone didn't stop laughing for about a minute.
It's been known to happen, yeah.
I love tinfoil hats.
It's lovely to have you. But, how about we hum on to a different subject and talk about some music?
Sounds good.
So Hum is a band that I actually discovered through another podcast. Someone asked one of the hosts via an email and said, what's a band that you would recommend that nobody's heard of? And he recommended Hum. And Hum is I guess, punk or maybe post-punk inspired band from the 90s. And there's one song you may have heard by them, and that's Stars, which I'll throw into the background. And I love their use of silence is the way I would describe the reason why I'm drawn to this band. They have this way of pacing their music and then just pausing at the perfect moment to then emphasize the really heavy guitars that come in right after that, followed by the soft vocals. It's just a really awesome combination that just keeps me going.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to a bit of them, and the vibe I got was kind of like Our Lady Peace meets System of a Down with a lot of weed.
A lot of weed. I mean, System of a
Yeah.
Down is on enough speed to feed a small army, so I guess, yeah, someone's got to slow them down eventually.
Yeah, like replace everything that those other two bands were on with weed.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I tend to have an attraction
man.
to stoner rock in general, so maybe that's part of it, but
That's fair.
it's just so, like, just nice to listen to. I just can't, like, now that you've described it like that, I'm sitting here going, huh, now I want to just sit here and slow down some System of a Down and see what that sounds like. Have you ever seen that video of Justin Bieber's Baby run at 10% speed?
I mean, I'm sure someone's done that. I really enjoyed Hum. Heard of Stars before. A friend of mine showed me it. It has the most amazing post-rock vibe. Is really reminiscent of like Fugazi, kind of a more in-your-face style of Fugazi, but the guitars are really powerful, and I think that's something that post-rock really needs to differentiate itself from just being alternative.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just like the heaviness combined with their use of silence and their use of musical timing, and then just how shockingly heavy portions of their music can be. Is this almost weird before their
Yes.
time kind of thing? Like, I feel like if this band came out now, everybody, like, in at least my circles, would have heard of them.
Yeah. All of that combined, like, it really gives like this kind of disconnect feeling to it. You know, it's just chugging along, and then it just kind of doesn't come to like a screeching halt, but it just kind of like fades out and kind of creates the feeling of disconnect from their music as a whole. And I think that really plays really well with their style. And Fugazi is kind of like seen as like the quintessential post-hardcore / post-rock band. So basically, like, they're almost kind of like an evolution of post-hardcore, becoming a lot more rock-oriented. So I could say like they were around there with the post-rock revival that saw a small spike in like the mid to late 90s.
So, Enigmancer, what was kind of your impressions of this band aside from what you've like?
Yeah, I
already
mean,
said?
I definitely enjoyed it. It was a little like you mentioned that the guitar was really powerful. Sometimes I found it a little hard to like zero in on the lyrics. I was drawn more to the instrumentals, even when lyrics were going, which I think is where I was coming from with the whole stoner thing. Like the energy almost doesn't match, but I mean, dissonance isn't always a bad thing. It kind of gives you layers to like come back to later on.
Gives you something to like
Mhm.
discover.
I've always
through
found
each
them
playthrough.
surprisingly complex. Like, they're a very re-listenable band. Like, I can't count the number of times I've listened to You'd Prefer an Astronaut, which admittedly was their most successful album. I think that they're kind of one of those bands that just kind of got lost in the fray, and I'd honestly just recommend that you could give them a listen if you like, as Enigmancer said, stoner rock or things along closer to the lines of like a post-rock type thing. But shall we move on to our next pick here, which was Enigmancer's Vandals. So why did you pick this band?
I mean, I was first exposed to them in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. They were definitely on the soundtrack, but at the time it didn't really register that it was something I was going to latch onto long term. But I mean, their lyrics are, I find them very insightful, albeit simple, and they go over a very broad range of, I guess, topics, but also they do covers of stuff like Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies and Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious from Mary Poppins, despite being a punk group, so it's quite enjoyable for me.
So I'm looking at their not their Bandcamp, but their Wikipedia page right now, and I didn't know this. Also known as Anarchy Taco. Can someone explain this to me?
I wish I could. They have a song called Anarchy Burger.
Okay. Apparently they're also known as Anarchy
tours.
Taco. But,
Yeah.
I mean, sure. Yeah. So I swear to God I've heard this band. I listened to most of their discography, which was quite extensive. Like, all I can really say is that they are an entertaining, manically fast, almost spastic punk group, and they're very fun to listen to. It's perfectly fitting that you say they were in Tony Hawk. I've never actually gotten into the Tony Hawk games. The only one I played was Underground 2. I think it was quite rad, honestly. It was fun listening back to, like, 80s into 90s and then early 2000s punk. We talk about punk quite a bit on this show, so I know Rhinestone was excited to talk about this group.
So I got into the Vandals not through Tony Hawk, because I didn't start playing the Tony Hawk games until I think Pro Skater 3 was the first one that I played. But I grew up listening to a lot of punk, a lot of hardcore, a lot of metal, and the Vandals was probably like the third or fourth punk band that I like really, really got into because of the rapid delivery of the lyrics. The topics were sometimes like comedic, with tracks like My Girlfriend's Dead, which is probably my favorite. They've also toured with, just about every awesome, punk band out there. And of course they were one of the ones who built like the Orange County punk scene, which not a lot of punk bands can claim. They're just one of my favorite bands. These guys kind of stayed around, and they've definitely like lasted the test of time that a lot of punk bands haven't been able to really fulfill, especially with them being active since the early 80s.
It's like an impressively long timeline. And Ignacio, you said that that this band kind of resonated with you. Like, what kind of kept them around in your memory this long, ever since Tony Hawk?
Well, I actually did lapse away from them for quite a while. It was only, say, about 8 years ago or so. I got into, this is going to sound really weird until it all comes together, but I got into Zen Buddhism. And one of the authors that I was reading a lot, I'll name drop, you can edit it if you need to, Brad Warner. He used to be in a hardcore punk group growing up, moved to Japan, got into Zen. And so his perspective was very much from the punk lifestyle. I guess the delivery of Zen concepts came from a very punk place. I don't really remember precisely how it happened, but I just remembered that the Vandals were kind of on the same key. Like, they have one song called Flowers Are Pretty. It's a very Zen outlook on life.
They weren't a punk band by many of the punk standards back in the day. Like, they mostly wrote about what was going on around them at the time. So, like, one of their first albums was about their experience within the Orange County punk scene, which featured a song about one of their good friends abused drugs and caused us all sorts of mayhem. They also had another song called Pirate's Life, which was about them taking LSD and going on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. So, like, they weren't the stereotypical punk group, especially when like stereotypical punk groups of the time were, kind of like Black Flag, where the lyrics were emotionally charged and usually had something to do with the government or just against the status quo.
So since it feels like we've been talking about a lot of punk, let's talk about some more punk. So let's talk about Ryan's pick for this week.
Yeah, so I chose the Menzingers, which is a punk band, punk slash pop punk band out of
Actually, need to
Scranton.
interrupt you for a question here. Is it pronounced the Messengers, like messengers with a Z, or is it pronounced Mezzingers, like men singers with a Z? Because I can't figure this out.
The latter is how I've always pronounced it.
Yeah, I the latter is what I was gravitating towards.
Yeah, hey, okay. I guess I'm the backwards one here. I was pronouncing it like messengers, but with like a. Is that maybe I can like figure this out? I'm just kidding. You go on. Right?
Yeah, so they're a punk slash pop punk band coming out of Scranton, Pennsylvania. They have a few albums, I believe 5. The most recent one coming out 2 years ago, which is also one of my favorites. Just like modern baseball, have this knack for talking about like deep subjects, like in the song "I Don't Want to Be an Asshole Anymore." Clearly, "I Don't Want to Be an Asshole Anymore" is about him trying to become a better person and trying to kind of become more empathetic to the people around him. But it has the backing of some like just like really happy, upbeat, tune, personal like mental issues or like relationship issues and stuff like that. I kind of really like that because they're not sad songs. It's almost kind of like a sense of self-discovery, almost like self-discovery, a realization that nobody likes me because I'm an asshole. So I need to change that. I need to become, at least in the video, which features features Jason,
i.e., like hatchet murderer Jason.
Yes, hatchet murderer Jason. Basically becoming a functioning member of society, but being constantly rejected because of the stigma. And as soon as he gets a chance to open up to somebody, gets ran over. Like it's a perfect it's a perfect depiction of the song. And that's how a lot of their songs are.
So I will kind of agree with you that they do a very good job kind of depicting depressing topics in kind of a happy, bouncy manner. But I think that's kind of almost a common thing for like the subgenre of music. Punk tends to kind of take something that's harsh and gnarly and then just frame it in a way so that it's approachable. And before I kind of go off on a tangent here, Enigmancer, what was your impression of the Messengers?
Yeah, a lot of what Ryan said was on point with where I was. With that song in particular, I couldn't help but think about the latest God of War game and Kratos talking about how we need to be better. It's like the coming of age story that you don't see in most movies, where like the bully that is an asshole in the movies finally realizes that he's not going to get anywhere once the movie's over, of course. It was good to see that perspective, and their delivery is definitely enjoyable. I guess there was, I work by comparison and analogy a lot. So what came up for me was like, I guess Green Day meets Panic at the Disco. Controversial, I know. Like the tinfoil hat is going on, but
I think you just crushed Ryan.
I'm done. I'm out.
I mean, not necessarily in terms of the overall sound, but the pacing.
I don't disagree with you.
Okay.
Like at all. I think that's kind of a pretty accurate comparison. I just think it's hilarious.
Yeah, it's just kind of funny because like that's not what I would grab onto. But then again, like most of the comparisons that I would make to describe the Menzingers is a lot of bands that people would probably go like, what?
As far as like impressions of the band go, for me, listening to the Menzingers was very much I felt like I'm nostalgic for a band that I've never heard before, and it's weird.
I love that feeling.
I don't get that feeling very often, but I feel like this is a band that would have been my favorite band in 2006 or 2007. For whatever reason, Charlie's Army was damn funny just as a track for me to listen to, which was track 5 on their most recent album. And it's literally, you know, the classic high school story of like, oh, well, I want this dude's girl and I don't care. But it just made me smile. It's like sitting down and watch, like, to me, this band is the equivalent of, like, the audio equivalent of sitting down and watching the first American Pie. Like, it's a terrible movie, but it's popcorn and I like it. And this band to me is just kind of like the audio version of that in many ways. Whether that's a positive or negative thing, I'm not entirely certain, but I enjoyed listening to them a whole lot. It was a lot of fun, certainly.
And I mean, that's kind of what their band is about. It's all about having fun while talking to those, or while talking about those subjects. One of the bands that I described to you to try to sell them, because me knowing who the Bouncing Souls were, they're just like the Bouncing Souls. They're all about having fun, but still maintaining the aspects of keeping themselves anchored in the world, or being happy but not too happy that you become disconnected from what makes people, not just focusing on the emotion of
So I
happy.
think that was a pretty solid recommendation, but do we want to talk about some people that are pretty disconnected for other people for very specific reasons? That was
Yeah.
I'm gonna pat myself on the back for that segue again. So we sat down.
Especially of the flat variety.
We always sit down and watch a movie or a film or something to then talk about and spoil. We can't really spoil this one because of the subject matter, but we watched the Flat Earth documentary, Behind the Curve. I think I can speak for us all to say that none of us are flat earthers, so please don't panic. This is going to be an interesting, I think, 20, 30 minutes or however long we blab about this. But, okay, who wants to start? Any takers?
So I would just like to start off that I would like to sort of reiterate we shouldn't push them away, because a lot of them are actually pretty intelligent.
No, I agree.
Take, for example, the guy who was trying to do the pole experiment. You know, he came up with the idea to try to do this, and even though specifically for the pole or panel experiment that he tried to do didn't work, he wasn't stopped by it. You know, he wanted to keep going to try to get it to work. And towards the end of the film, they kind of revise it and kind of do it like a reverse way, using like a kind of like a pinhole strategy. And it does not work the way that he wants it to, but he still refuses to believe it, just like they did with the I forget what the instrument they used was, but the laser, like,
the laser gyroscope. Yes,
the laser gyroscope.
So let's just kind of start off with our impressions of this. I mean, we've kind of done a point of view that we're going to attack this at, which is let's not make fun of anybody, let's not throw insults or call people dumb. We're just going to try and discuss this like grown-ups, I think. I'm just going to kind of go around the table and just see what was everybody's impression of this documentary and the people in it. Let's start off with Enigmancer over here.
I mean, it was a little hard to sit through the whole thing in one shot, but I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if they were going to go in with a bias. And at first it seemed like it was very neutral, but there were some points where it kind of felt like they were making fun of the flat earthers, which I can't necessarily blame them for. I mean, they're still human beings. Humans do things that are susceptible to that. Yeah, I don't feel that my mind was changed about how I view the earth. I did come out with more questions than I went in with, but they're mostly questions that I would present to a flat earther were the conversation open.
I think for me, I kind of went into this just kind of expecting to chuckle at it the entire time. I actually, I tend to disagree with you in your statement of saying that they were making fun of them necessarily. I think there was a few lines from both sides where, you know, they had scientists, they had astronauts, they had psychologists, they had flat earthers, they had people that were what I would describe as interesting on there, kind of from both sides. And I think there was points, and I actually think that this documentary is edited very well, where it starts you off kind of as a like I'm a scientific individual from the start. It starts you off in looking in a direction of, oh, you're going to make fun of these people. And then towards the end, I just kind of felt sorry for them. And I really, this documentary kind of made me sad in a way that I wasn't expecting. For me, the Earth is still most definitely a sphere. We're definitely living on a ball. Gravity is still a thing. Space is still a thing. We are rocketing through space faster than you'll ever see. I mean, hell, the film disproves their attempts multiple times, as you mentioned earlier with the gyroscope. Almost a tricky documentary to talk about just purely because there is so many opportunities to accidentally insult somebody. And when you have people that are so determined to believe something that either they were raised believing or decided to believe, or maybe they are just a naturally distrusting person and want to disprove everything that's above them and fight the power, I can respect that. And it's scary when it's pointed at something that is factually incorrect.
Just to piggyback off of what I was saying earlier, a lot of the flat earth people that they featured are actually fairly intelligent. They know how to, and I think the film did a pretty good job of, and not painting every flat earth person as like some crazed whack job, you know, who doesn't have any idea of what they're talking about. Mike Sargent, I will say that some of his logic is flawed. He has done a lot of what a lot of people don't want to do, and that's research. Whether it's wrong or correct, I kind of look at it more as, you know, he's doing what he believes is right, and I can stand by that. And I think the film really opened my eyes to the fact that not every single one of them are absolute whack jobs. And like what was said in the film by, I can't remember his name, these are just scientists that have gone off to the wayside, and that it should be the scientific community's job to kind of bring them in, because a lot of them would make great researchers and other things. And that's kind of like my impression of the documentary, was that this was kind of made to bring flat earthers to the light, and not so much legitimize the whole flat earth theory, but kind of showed that they're not whack jobs, they're not crazy. Yes, it made no change on my mind, because a lot of the logic that was mentioned I kind of scoffed at. Sargent was like pointing out, you know, that's Seattle over there. You know, I should only be able to see
how that works, Mr. Sargent.
The very top of the buildings. And it's like, well,
we're on the Earth, not the moon.
Go stand out on the coast and look at the horizon and watch ships coming into port. You'll see them almost rise up out of the water.
I know after researching this documentary a little bit, when I decided that I wanted to talk about it on this show, you know, obviously the initial goal is to just say, oh, you know, let's talk about flat Earth. Let's make fun of flat Earth. I think that the documentary's intention isn't what a lot of people on the outside who haven't seen it expect. You know, a lot of people think that, oh, there's a flat Earth documentary on Netflix, they're trying to convert people. I don't think they're trying to convert people. I think they're just trying to get people talking, kind of like you said. And I think that it actually achieves its goal there, especially considering I went in with the intention of making fun of them. You know, be honest there. And I think that in many cases it actually scares me a little bit. I work in content creation, and I work in online entertainment. And I think that flat earthers are kind of a perfect example of where the internet can go wrong. You have an echo chamber like Twitter, or an echo chamber like Reddit or 4chan, or any message board, any forum, any email link. You can have people that just echo the wrong message back and forth enough, which leaves those trails that allow people like Mark Sargent to go and research and go down the wrong rabbit holes of incorrect information. To then, you have somebody who's very intelligent, who has high levels of deductive reasoning, that they then force themselves to believe something that is a made-up dream. And that is scary, especially with the existence of, things like sillier things like SCP containment breach. Like I know people who have freaked out because they're reading SCP and they think the site is real. It's an imaginary site. Like hell, we've had stories like Slender Man. And then people going off and doing something stupid because they believe that a creature exists when it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I failed to mention that I also studied psychology in school. For me, it's not necessarily anything new. People, especially if they're, I guess, disheartened with the state of their own life or how they see society, they almost latch on, not everyone, but a certain subset of people will latch on to doubt almost, or skepticism. Like anything else, you can have healthy skepticism, you can have calorie restriction if you're trying to lose weight. And then it can go into more of a clinical, just maladaptive. That would be the term. You're becoming so skeptical of what's presented and accepted, possibly because you see it as a way to give yourself. I mean, they mentioned it in the film as well. They've found their identity in doing this whole community. So it's understandable. I think right now, just given this is my opinion, not psychology speaking as a whole, just the number of people that there are in the world now, and the accessibility of information, but also the ease with which you can put the content out there. It's an inevitability. I think it's the first wave of some crazier things that will probably come, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the same thing about the whole echo chamber, but because like their beliefs don't fit to what everyone else's reality is, they want to bring everybody else into their reality. And the scary thing is flat earth parents.
Yeah.
And while I'm not going to like sit here and call them, names and stuff like that, they're essentially brainwashing their children. The same thing that they accuse the schools of doing when the schools teach about what the status quo is. Sphere, ball earth, as they refer to it as. And they're essentially doing the same thing that the schools are doing. What I would much rather see them teach their kids is, like what was said already, healthy skepticism. And if you want, teach your kid about flat earth, but don't flat out tell your kid like what they're teaching you at school is incorrect. Because I kind of hold the same thing about the theory of evolution in schools and stuff. You can teach your kid about creationism. That's fine. But allow your kid, if they are old enough to make that decision, let them choose what they want to believe. Because more often than not, they're going to choose what is backed by what they feel is empirical evidence. And some have even kind of embraced like, oh yeah, I believe in creationism, but I believe in a different variation of it. Or this new variation of creationism has worked the evolutionary theory into it to make it sound more plausible. But we're talking about flat earth here, and I don't think there's any way that they could kind of coexist with one another as creationism and evolutionary theory has.
Well, I mean, on that topic, if I may don my tinfoil hat.
Don that tinfoil hat, sir.
Don it, my good man.
One of the things that came to mind was the concept or the theory or the notion that we're in a simulation. You know, the Matrix did it, but then it's been that's another example of
I like this
one of those beliefs that
This
can go.
one's fun.
Yeah. And then I was thinking, you know, like, okay, just hypothetically, suspending disbelief. If we are in a simulation, what if someone is actually messing with us and the world for some people, like, think of a video game, right? You're in instances.
Oh, fuck.
But there's still global chat. So what if for some people it actually is flat and they're just running an experiment? Like,
It's flat for like a very small percentage of people, but everybody else,
Yeah, like how...
well, it's like in an MMO. There's, what was it? Star Wars Galaxies. Like when it first came out, maybe 0.5% of people could ever unlock Jedi.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then once they worked out the kinks with that, you know, before they really got into beta testing in MMOs, test servers and whatever, then they released it globally. I don't expect that to happen with the Flat Earth, but the psychiatrist in the movie stated that, you know, if he has 5 or 10 minutes with anyone, he'll probably be able to come up with some belief that your friends are going to be very surprised that you hold.
Yeah. And honestly, that's true. Like, because it's human nature, you know. It's human nature to pick and choose what you want to.
Wow, it's almost scary that I'm having like insights as we talk about it.
You pick and choose what you want to believe based on your reality, like what you perceive. And I think that's entirely what the Flat Earth community has done. And they've done it in such a way that they can kind of come together as almost a hive mind, because there are little factions, as what was described.
Some more radical than others.
And they've been able to create their own reality where they're able to pretty much hive mind the same ideas, and that's the scariest part for me.
I'm trying to think of how to articulate it, but it's almost comparable, as you guys said. It kind of the documentary humanized the flat earthers a lot, and the more I think about it, like, there's such things as body dysmorphia, which can lead to anorexia, or there's muscle dysmorphia, which is more prevalent in, say, like the YouTube and Instagram fitness channels. So it's almost like a earth dysmorphia, where it's something they're so familiar with, but their perception of it is so skewed from what the rest of us see.
I completely agree with that, because a lot of like the quote unquote first generation, you know, they grew up being told, you know, what we all believe in, and somewhere down the line, you know, they took some kind of text that was created long ago, because I think because, you know, back in, what was it, like the 1500s, everybody believed that the earth was flat, pretty much until Christopher Columbus came back and was like, there's no passage to India the way we thought it would be. And I believe that kind of like reaffirmed a lot of people's like beliefs back then. But as time went on, obviously we discovered there is a passage. You just have to go around South America. I think it was Magellan who circumnavigated, at least his expedition, circumnavigated the flat earth community, kind of throws that whole thing out of the water.
The thing that scares me is how they tend to do that a lot. They'll get something that disproves them, and their absolute insistence on, and this surfaces a lot towards the end of the documentary. It's their absolute insistence on they are right and the other is wrong. And it's really scary because they refer to science and, the government or whoever's in charge as the enemy. And I see that, or not necessarily me, but once you have designated someone as the enemy, it's almost impossible for you ever to come together with that person and agree on something. You have to humanize the other side to find a common ground. And the fact that they, or at least the people featured in this film, are demonizing government, they're demonizing science, they're demonizing the intellectual world. For a lot of them, it almost feels like they will just go out of their way to claim, well, that's wrong, I'll find an excuse for that. And they reference this in the film. Some of the scientists towards the end talk about this, and they say that, this is, regardless of what people in the scientific world say, they will find something to disprove that. Regardless of what history says, they will find something to disprove that. Oh, that was faked. Oh, that was faked. Well, that's obviously the government that's doing that. It's the Illuminati, or it's the Masons, or insert tinfoil hat theory here. It did this thing, did it? Regardless of what science comes up with, they will disprove that. And it's...
what's his name? Not Sargent.
Oh, the guy that started it, and then
the guy who started it
support.
pulled his support because he saw that Sargent was becoming more popular than him. And I want to say that guy is more upfront with being the egotistical, like megalomaniac that he very clearly is. And I just want to say that the guy's logic is insane. Like, I know that he was like one of the artist renderers or something like that. Why would NASA invite him to like some quote unquote top secret party? Like, a lot of what he said originally was completely unbelievable. And it's difficult for me to wrap my head around they could have found some kind of truth to what he is saying. Because of the way he acts, I am vehemently in agreement with anyone that says that the whole flat earth community started was because this guy was seeking attention.
Just to confirm, you are talking about that channel that I just linked, Math
yes,
Powerland?
Math Powerland. Sorry, I will openly attack that man because he is just, the logic is all over the place. It is all over the place, and it is like he took what was at one point his very solid and found logic and just threw it on the ground, watched it shatter, and just left it there.
I think for me, the scary thing about him and even this movie in general is he saw him like it's a situation where you have a individual who is running on a power trip, and it's happened in pretty much every industry. You have somebody who's on the top who then suddenly discovers, oh hey, this is slipping, I no longer have my attention, okay, we must attack the attention. And him, to a point, versus everybody else featured in this film, to be specific, if you haven't watched this documentary, Math Powerland refused to take part in the film because he wanted 75% prevalence in the film and $5,000 up front, plus 25% revenue from the entire film in order to take place, and they said no. So he refused to take part in the film. So the only scenes with him in the actual film itself is just clips from his YouTube channel. Feel free to look it up if you want. He's very much encapsulated in this film as a nut job, I think is maybe the easiest way to explain it. He seems erratic. He is very deep in more or less every conspiracy theory, and as far as I can tell. And it actually confuses me as to why he is so heavily shown in this film. Especially, like, I'm actually just talking about behind the curve of the movie in general. It feels like the film is trying to, humanize and start a conversation between science and flat Earth community. But then they throw this guy in the mix, and he's like, there's a fucking punching bag compared to the rest of them. He's nuts. He doesn't have any form of argument. He doesn't have any sanity to himself. He just throws shit at the wall. And when you have a community that follows you vehemently, you can do that because they will listen to whatever you have to say.
And I think that was the point of including him. Like, it's almost the Infinite Monkeys, but with an infinite audience. Eventually something is going to stick, as you said.
I think why they included him is because the objective was to humanize, but I think they wanted to put him in kind of as like a ground. They put him in there to show that not everybody in the flat Earth community thinks like he does. And him being the loudest member, a lot of people probably have seen more of this this Math Powerland guy than they have of Sargent, who is a little bit more. I would still say Sargent is still a little bit of kind of like a narcissist, but much less so. I think he kind of has like this kind of like healthy kind of narcissism, where it's not like an obsession with himself, but the other guy, the guy who went viral because he attacked somebody in a Starbucks.
Oh God,
like,
I don't even want to.
I think, yeah, no, he is one of the nut jobs, because he opened like in public, like walked up to this guy who worked for NASA. How does it feel to lie to Americans? And like,
well, this is the guy that was bouncing ping pong balls on hammers, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. His whole demeanor when they started interviewing him just seemed kind of trolly.
Yes, and he's like one of the reasons why my initial belief is like a lot of people who like say they believe in flat Earth just say it because it's a troll thing to do, because when someone hears that you're a flat earther, they're like, you're one of them crazy people, aren't you?
Maybe what they're trying to do, because I did compliment this documentary's editing quite a bit, and I think you two touched on this, but the editing of this documentary is kind of weighted in an angle, so they assume that everybody who clicks on this or watches this on Netflix is going in to say, let's laugh at this. But they front load you with the crazy people. Well, actually, they front load you with Mark Sargent and his mom, which is kind of an adorable duo. And then they hit you with the people who I almost feel like are there to make fun of. I know that we went into this saying that we don't want to, insult people, but there is a level of respect that people have to have for another person in order for me to respect you, right? So if you don't respect other people, it's hard for me to respect you. And in the case of the individual with the golf balls, who I should probably look up the name of, but if you watch this movie, you'll know who I'm talking about immediately. In the case of him, he doesn't respect minorities. In fact, he states that. And he's an anti-vaxxer, and he's a flat earther.
He also has a brain coach.
He's a brain coach. He claims that the Earth is several thousand years old, states that dinosaurs are fake. This is the kind of person that, from a scientific perspective, is sideways. And you look at that and you're like, how can I have a conversation with a person who is so forced in another direction against everything I've been taught, against everything that we know to be true? Someone who vehemently goes above all else to just disagree with everybody on principle. How do you have an argument with somebody like that? How do you have a discussion with somebody like that?
So they did introduce him as the evangelist.
The evangelist.
That describes my least favorite portion of the flat Earth community. The people who tie in religious teachings into it. Oh man, like that guy is literally the epitome of like why people don't take flat earthers seriously at all.
No, him and Math are the two examples in the film, I think, of people that are looked at as what?
Yeah.
Whereas Mark Sargent, I think, is somebody who could have a discussion with a scientific individual or somebody in the science community, and they'd come out and shake hands and smile and have a nice day. It certainly seems like some of these other individuals that are featured in this film are there just to show the heavy side.
I would honestly love to sit down with Sargent and have a beer and discuss that stuff, because I know he mentions a lot about how he became one, but I would like to know why he decided to start looking into it in the first place, because I don't think the film really touched on that. It mostly touched on how he came to his beliefs.
But yeah, I was gonna say on that, talking to Sargent, I mean, there is the international conference. We could all just go next, or I guess this year. I don't know what time of year it is.
Is this in the podcast, or am I cutting
Let's
this?
go to North Carolina.
Oh, dear Lord.
That is entirely up to you, sir.
See, the issue with that is if I were to attend the conference, I would have to give them money. And I kind of have a thing against
I don't know. They might do press
giving
badges.
people money that I don't necessarily agree with.
Everything that we've said about this film, I kind of recommend that people go out there and even if it's hard to sit through, there are portions of this movie, especially from a science point of view, that are hard to sit through. I would recommend you watch it just purely out of fascination for how the human mind works and how we see things differently. And that's kind of my closing thoughts. I do recommend people watch this movie, even if not from the point of view to just sit down and laugh at it, but from the point of view of it's a fascinating study on how people see things differently and how we should be talking about how we see things differently instead of just hiding it inside and then bursting out and creating negative impacts and disagreements between each other. Because, whether it's a flat or a ball, we're on this rock together and we should at least agree on something. Do either of you guys have closing thoughts or something you would like to say about this movie?
Yeah, I would just like to say, go into the movie with an open mind. Hear them out so that you can understand why some of these people, and I will say some because of the people that we had mentioned before, so that you can understand where they're coming from and you can understand their position, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to create dialogue. That being said, again, we need to stop making fun of every single flat earther, because that just gives them ammo. When you put up a picture of Sargent and say some unsavory things, all you're doing is turning him into a martyr for the flat earth community. You're not really getting anything done, is essentially what I'm saying.
Yeah, on that same note, as I said earlier, the suspension of disbelief, I think, is very important, not only for this documentary, but in general. I think it was a really good exercise in that, because sometimes it's easy to forget that we are dogmatic in some of our beliefs, on both sides of it. And it's just, at the end of the day, we're all people. I don't want to say it's good to have that much variety to those extents, but
as long as you're not killing each other, whatever makes you happy, as far as I'm concerned. But let's at least have a conversation about this.
Yeah, don't outright dislike someone just because they're a flat earther.
Yeah, I mean, for all you know, your the love of your life could be on the flat earth dating site.
Oh no. Then you have to write a song on the new Messengers album. But Thank you very much, everybody, for listening to this episode of Audio Tapes and Visual Drugs. If you wanted to get early episodes of the show, you can find that on my personal Patreon, which is patreon.com/BLINDIRL, and you can find me anywhere else under that name. Enigmancer, our guest, is there anything you would like to shout out or point people towards from your time on this episode?
I definitely want to say thank you for having me on. It was good times. But in terms of channels and whatnot, I go by Enigmancer on all platforms. Twitch, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. So yeah. That's me.
I'm the odd one out here, and you can find me on Twitch. Twitch.tv/Rhinestone, and that is RYNESTONE. And you can find me over on Twitter at DubsCheckem, DUBSCHEKEM.
And of course,
I have a lot of.
Of course, all of our links will be findable in the description. And I just want to say once again, thank you very much, everybody, for listening to this extra long episode of Audio Tapes and Visual Drugs, along with our guest, Enigmancer. Thank you for joining us once again. Rhinestone, as always, thanks for co-hosting. We'll see you guys next week. You can say goodbye if you want. Doesn't matter.
Cheers.
Bye.